remember to sign into the document if you haven't already. New faces. I think everyone here has been to multiple of these meetings. Release planning updates. Anyone got anything? Looks like both Emily and Javier are not here, but maybe someone else.
Pack on the Pack side, Pack just released last week. We are considering. We had deferred like this previous release a few weeks to do it after the holiday. We're figuring out what to do for our next release, whether to keep it when it was initially scheduled or to move it like what we did with the previous release. So unclear yet. We'll kind of get some feedback from some of the more other people in the team.
Nice. Yeah, not aware of any immediate lifecycle releases, but I think just kind of working through the next release. Does someone want to run through the RFCs? If not, I'll do it.
I think you just volunteered, Jesse.
You may not like the way I drive, but we'll see. All right. Pack command to create a Buildpack repo. This looks new. Is it on the agenda, Joe?
Yeah, I'll put this on the agenda.
All right, cool. Move, analyze, phase before detect. Is that also on the agenda, or are we just waiting for some reviews from last week?
I'm not sure. I wasn't
That's
here.
up to you, Jesse, right? Didn't you update this? Do you want to talk about it more, or?
We did talk about it last week. Not everyone. There wasn't a complete overlap with the folks that are here today.
Let's put it on the agenda.
Okay. Sounds good. This one's in FCP. It's got all the votes, literally all the votes.
What's the date on that?
FCP it was done 5 days ago, so it's got a couple days
Okay,
left.
yeah, I think I did that on Friday, so it'll be this Friday.
Awesome. This one's in draft. Next one, move layer types to new table and layer toggle. Any movement on this one?
I think it has enough to FCP.
Oh, yeah, it does look good.
I think the only outstanding thing for me was just resolving Natalie's. We talked about it last week, but I think just getting some decision on Natalie's label stuff. But it might be just
the unresolved questions.
I think it's just the one question because we marked the other one out. Let's go.
Oh, I see.
Gotcha. Okay. Well, cool. We've got a week to figure it out and change votes, I guess, if need be. But it looks like it's good to go. All I need to do is the final comment period label. Is that all I have to do?
Yeah, and then I can just comment on closing date and stuff.
Could we not infer the date by when it was labeled? Since it tells you that at the bottom.
I like that. All right. Group additions to builder order. Anything on this one? It has no votes. Joe, do you have an update on this?
Yeah, I'm just waiting for votes. I addressed all the feedback.
All right. Everybody, please take a look. Next time. The next one's actually mine. Add lifecycle configuration file. I started a offhand discussion in the spec Slack channel about potentially closing this in favor of having like a simpler solution. So maybe I'll bring that back up if there's time today. If not, I'll push it to the next time. I'll put it on the agenda. This one's in FCP. It's probably, let's see what date it was, 7 days ago. So this one's good. So I guess whoever that's assigned to needs to take care of merging that. Is that right?
And issues.
And
We
issues.
merged into
okay.
PR already for pack, so
User research one is also FCP. Let's see if it's time. Yep, that one as well. And this one's also assigned to you, Terrence. So.
Yep.
All right. This one, I saw some movement in the comments on this one a bit. Is this one on the agenda to discuss anymore, or are we? Looks like we've got at least a vote from it on this one. Are we waiting for more movement on this from the PR author? Or are we ready to collect votes on this?
probably needs. There's a bunch of pieces of feedback. I can ping them.
All right.
Yeah, who's the Sherpa for this?
Oh, that's a good question.
It's gonna have my name on it. I can feel it.
Emily.
Emily. Okay.
You're off the hook
I
for
will
this
ping
one.
them.
All right. That one, that's a draft, right? Yeah. The rest of these are all drafts. So on to whoever has the first agenda item. Looks like, Joe, you added the move, analyze before detect to the top of the
Yeah,
agenda.
let's talk about that first.
All right. Did you want to share?
Sure. So I wasn't here when it was discussed last week, so I might need someone to catch me up when I find the tab. So where do we think this is at? Was there agreement that we want half of analyze before detect and not a prepare phase?
That seemed to be the consensus of the group that was discussing last week.
Yeah, I think the idea was that not a post prepare phase, but one to reserve it if we can just use it inside of the stuff we already have now, which makes sense from your proposal.
So if we wanted an optional prepare phase, the namespace is still open. That's not the pre-prepare.
You probably wouldn't want prepare to be optional if it did things like, you know, making sure that you had registry access and things like that. So there's still some reasons to have analyzer before detect to do some of the registry specific things that this RFC calls out. And we did leave in some of the new responsibilities that we could implement, like downloading build packs and things like that. And
All right, so what needs to happen is we got the stuff like inline build packs from this, because that'll go into some kind of prepare RFC. So you can focus on stack validation and mixing validation.
Like I don't
Yeah.
see any reason why it can't do inline build packs as well, or things that we've spec'd out. Like I was okay with this as it's written and have approved it.
Is Steven here?
He's missing the first half, he said.
Okay. I mean, that's my concern, is that I'm not sure Steven agrees with you on that.
yeah, if we can cut that, but I think it's fine to try to present as is. And if there is disagreement on what should be in it, I think that is the fat that we would cut. But I just didn't cut it because, as Emily said, we kind of discussed that it's maybe okay leaving some of these things in here that we not exactly sure what's gonna be implemented in the short term. But I think it's a good stretch goal to be able to support those things.
Okay.
I believe I've voted on this already. Is the biggest holdup just getting Steven to look at it?
Probably.
Um,
The next thing, if there's nothing else to talk about there, is the pat command to create a build pack repo.
yeah, so as part of some, I'll share this. Part of some work I was doing to make, I guess you'd call it learning materials on how you create build packs. I don't know if you noticed, but I've been creating a build pack every day. It's like, it feels like early days of any ecosystem where it's like, oh, that could be a build pack. I'll make a build pack. So a couple people asked me like, oh, what's your process for doing that? And I was too embarrassed to show them that it starts with like 10 different touch commands and make dir and all this, right? So I wanted to introduce, and this is something that I think Jose originally brought up like years ago about having like a bootstrapping command to create a build pack. So the proposal is a build pack create command with 3 options: language, which would default to bash; stack, which could be provided multiple times; and then path, which would be where you generate the artifacts. I basically have already written this, and there's a PR for it. So that's how it works. The default to bash was derived from the CMD user research, which I think indicated that like the comfort level of people, like part of the reason Docfile has been successful is bash oriented, and certain number of our users aren't necessarily Go users. Go would be an option. But if you're interested in looking at this PR, I've been doing a lot of looking at what the default to Go would look like, and it's not really clear to me. I've looked at Paketo Bootstrapper, which is a project I link in prior art. I'm guessing most of y'all are familiar with this. This works really well though because it's opinionated about like the packet library and all that. And without that stuff, I don't really know what to generate other than like an empty build.go, and even like, should I specify a package name and that kind of stuff. So those of you who have actually implemented Go build packs, I'd love feedback on. Somewhere in here, there's yeah, what should this do? That's where I could use some help. Yeah.
One suggestion, would there be any benefit to having template repos instead of this? As part of the Buildpacks project, we would have a bash build pack template.
I think that's absolutely the way this should be done.
Yeah, that makes sense.
If for nothing else, so that
Mhm.
so that individual companies could have their own repo internally for templating.
I was gonna think maybe a mixture of both, right? Where I think Cookie Cutter is a tool that essentially uses like a centralized repo for templates, but it's a CLI that you could then create, kind of like bring down that template. And so I think the CLI aspect gives it a very nice UX to it. And that's kind of what I would expect, or I think would be nice to have. But then the code, the template, be centralized in a repo, and it just pulls it from there, because that way we can make additional updates to it as well as they are necessary.
Yeah, that seems totally compatible with what I'm proposing. I looked at cookie cutter really quick. The thing that I would like to avoid is kind of what I've always felt with like Maven archetypes, where you get like dozens of options that you need to fill in. Like I want to keep this command simple, right? Whether it's pulling from a template repository or whatever. I don't want you to have to like give me the version, give me the ID, give me the license, you know. I want that stuff to be out of the box, and I want to put some constraints around what it can do, is I guess what I'm suggesting. Like that template repository will just be opinionated about the license or the version, the starting version or something like that. So as long as I think something like that's compatible.
Do we need a list of suggested templates like we have for builders that are vendor specific, so that people can don't have to go figure out where to find a template?
What I was suggesting was one single repo that would have different languages in it, and then people could just take it and do whatever they want with it, right? But individual contributors could also contribute different languages, so we don't have to really worry about it all too much.
So if you wanted to add a Python template, you would PR into the Buildpacks / Buildpacks
Templates.
repo.
Yeah, something like
Python
that.
directory. Yeah. That makes sense.
I mean, are you proposing some sort of, in your vision of this, do the templates still interact with this new command, or are the templates just standalone things people can use?
I think both, right? Like, I don't see why they have to be mutually exclusive. I think if you set very specific placeholders and that's all it's doing, it's really just kind of mutating those placeholders via whatever templating library, then it's easy, right? A user can manually edit them, and our program could essentially pull them down and fill them in as well.
I think
If
it would be
you've ever
hard.
used the .NET CLI, they have a pretty good templating system for like .NET New, where you have like console, web application, and it ships with a bunch of defaults that are like sort of Microsoft community approved. And
I'm starting to get worried now, because when we talk about templating languages, that's not the direction I wanted to go. Like the template in my mind would be fairly static, and then like this command would not accept a bunch of options that go in and get replaced into various like this would not accept the Go version. Like there'd be a template for Go 1.15, and that's the template. And then there are some things that would have to be generated. I mean, mainly the Buildpack toml, right? That's the only thing where you would sort of override what's in the template, but it wouldn't be parameterized. That's my vision, sort of.
Even at VMware, we have two internal competing libraries for bootstrapping Buildpack templates for Buildpacks written in Go specifically, if that makes sense. I wonder if it's going to be hard to agree on what the default template for Go should be within the CNB project, because there are competing options out there.
Yeah, I mean, I guess just one of my questions was, does it make sense just to start with Bash and kind of punt on the other stuff if the Bash stuff is very simple and clean cut?
I think that Bash is a good starting point for people. The Instana buildbacks that you do, I don't know if you like on this or another PR, or pretty simple Bash. It's probably simpler for people to start with.
Yeah, so what if we were to start with this exact command and remove language? And it just always generates Bash. And then in the future, we add a -- template that at that point, we can have a discussion about a templating language and all those kinds of things. But that wouldn't change the sort of essence of the command. And in that original command that doesn't have any parameters other than the ID would still be totally acceptable and work exactly the same way.
Makes a lot of sense to me. My nits would be that we should call it init instead of create.
Yeah, that's fine. I'm not in love with create.
Yeah, I like init or new, because I think those are the common ones.
I was thinking that as well, just because then we, with this and with the Stackify PR, we're we have already a build or create a method. We're also, this would be adding a build pack create method and a stack create method, and they do wildly different things. So yeah, newer in it would probably be my preference as well.
And my other question was, we've, pushed kind of far into making everything a build pack, including multi-build packs. And do we care about supporting a build pack with an order instead of stacks? And because we've called all these things build pack, is it clear to people that this is only a subset?
Yeah, I was thinking about that, and at first I thought there would be, like one option to generate a regular build pack, one option to generate the meta multi-build pack. But I think I don't really know what you would generate. Like, it's hard to assume what the package toml looks like, if it's what the subdirectories are, if we have them, what the order looks like. Like, I kind of reduced it to like, well, there's an empty build pack toml and that's it. And so I wasn't really sure where to go with that. And I was just kind of thinking that like, meta build pack's just a thing we don't generate. It's, because it's mostly just a toml file. I don't know if that is right. That's what I was thinking.
The meta build pack is just the toml file, right?
Yeah.
Like at the end of the day, when you package it up, I mean, the build package and other stuff may be different, but the actual thing on disk that you're coding against is just that toml file. I think it'd be useful to just generate the skeleton like any init thing. But I don't want like option explosion. And I also think about like, do stack packs change? Like if I'm building a stack pack, is that different?
I mean, I could see an option to generate or like a template for a stack pack. But a couple things with that. I don't see the typical build pack, new to build pack. The person who would use this command typically generating the stack pack. That's one thing. Two, what's generated is so far is completely compatible with stack packs. You just need to add the configuration, for in the build pack toml and do certain things in your build and whatever. So it's not like what's being generated today. Let me see if I can pull this up. It's just embedded in your doc. Like, this is not like opinionated about whether it's a stack pack or not.
Yeah, I guess just to Emily's point, supporting all the different types. I think it could be an add-on to the RFC that isn't part of this RFC. Maybe it's out of scope, because I think the default to generate the 90% is fine. And if you added, say, a types flag or something after the fact, because you need to do something different, like for a meta build pack or something, I think that wouldn't be too hard to add on, and it just renders the toml file. I just think about basically most language author people probably use like npm init or anything, no matter if you're beginner or advanced. Like, that is just what you use because it generates the stuff correctly for you. And I think even for meta build packs, you probably would want that.
So, I mean, I agree with that. It's just, do we want this RFC to be the 5-year vision of pack build pack new, or is this an RFC for the MVP, Because I'm definitely not targeting npm init like behavior, like an interactive asking you a bunch of questions and things like that.
Right. Even in like your Rails new or cargo init, like, or it's not cargo new, like, they're not interactive, like, but basically even veterans use it, right? Like, no one generates any of that stuff by hand. No, I was like, I'm not saying it should be in scope. I was just falling on what Emily was saying. But I also think like supporting that would be like one flag, and it would be an optional thing that is not the default.
Slightly different, but talking about MVP, how do you feel about making the stack flag optional and just defaulting to any?
It is.
It is? Okay.
Yeah, it defaults to the Bionic stack, which I figured made sense.
I think it should default to any just because
Oh
it's
yeah.
maybe like
That's a
they don't
little
have to,
dangerous though.
but they don't want to have to think about it, right? Like if you bring something down and it happens to be like the OpenShift, whatever, right? Like you know what you're playing with essentially. I'm just thinking about the friction of trying to learn about the stack and the environment that you're running in.
Yeah, I like any. To your point, like you have a target stack in mind you're developing for, and the second you open source and someone uses it on a stack, that's when you're like, oh, I don't support that stack, and then you go update the build pack toml.
I mean, I guess the counterpoint to that is if you're using OpenShift and Bionic doesn't work, you at least will fix it and make it work.
I don't care for Bionic, right? Like that's my thing. And again, it's more like the on-ramp, like the exploratory aspect of it. So it's, I don't know, very hypothetical. But that's what I would think when I start running this and I'm running it against, I guess a very specific version of Heroku's builder, and then it complains that the stack doesn't match. Like now I have to learn something new, right? Like it just doesn't feel as.
But
friendly.
isn't that better than using any and it being a lie, and then the person who's using your build pack has to go learn what all happened, right? Like I think what I worry about with defaulting to any is encouraging the V2 ecosystem, where it's like, yeah, sure, this build pack works on any stack, but not really, you know?
I mean, we kind of already do it, but just by omitting bash, right? Because it's not going to work on Windows build packs.
That's tough. Yeah.
Yeah, there's a few guards in here. You can generate bash build packs on Windows with the PR, but not build.bats.
Can you generate a PowerShell build pack and then just like have that be a flag? I don't know. I think this probably goes back to like specifying a template at all. And it's probably fine that you like just use bash. I mean, having worked on this in the community and also as part of work, I've never written anything other than a bash build pack. And the majority of the build packs that people ask me about are written in shell script.
I feel like we don't need to worry about Windows until people tell us we do. Like, I'd be a fan of just rolling it out and then seeing what happens in terms of like not overbloating it.
Same.
Okay,
I mean, it might
so
just be worth pinging Micah specifically and seeing if he has thoughts or opinions.
does that sound right? And is there anything I missed?
Are you just gonna have a future work section?
Yeah, that's
Or
kind of what I was
something.
thinking.
Cause I think the type thing would go under there too with like the different types of build packs.
Okay.
Now that Steven's here, do you want to talk about your previous thing, Joe?
Yeah, we were
With
looking
analyzer.
at analyze before detect, and I want to make sure we have consensus on, I'll pull it back up, on what the responsibilities of the analyzer are. Assuming that there would be also, in addition to the analyzer, some optional prepare thing. What are your expectations around what that analyze would do or would not do?
Were you going to share something specific or
Yeah,
just?
I'm pulling
Yeah,
up.
cool.
I mean, yeah, I was kind of like thinking I'd maybe let you talk before I tell you what was on my mind in particular, but
Sure.
it's, in particular, it's the project toml, I think, is the thing that's most in question.
Should analyze. So where is project toml coming from?
The source repository.
So when we're reading it from the application directory that the user provides, we're not going to parse it on the platform. So like my worry with project toml is not, I think I have two things. The thing I'm worried most about is making sure that we give platforms the flexibility to parse it at the right stage. The thing I worry a lot less about, but still think we should consider, is that Project toml is an extension, and a platform should be able to opt into supporting that functionality. It'd be good to modularize it to some extent, but I don't really have very strong opinions about that second thing, if that makes sense. It's much weaker than the first thing. There are things in Project toml like excludes that because lifecycle is entirely in container, right? There are things in Project toml like excludes that a platform needs to parse ahead of time to make decisions about what gets included in the app directory. I worry that things could get very complex if we have a model where we rely on Project toml to be presented to the lifecycle in the root of the app directory, and we rely on it to be presented at the root of the directory that you're providing to the platform to say, I want to do a build-in, where there can be very big differences between those things. One might have a Git directory, one might, as we expand what Project toml looks like, into multi-project things, right? It might become problematic that we're parsing Project toml in two places if that were a decision we chose to do, right? So I'd kind of like it if it was the platform's responsibility to parse Project toml, right? Sort of outside. And then there's metadata that the platform parses that it then provides into analyze, right? In order for in a format that could look very similar, but is still more normalized, right? Into things we expect the lifecycle to actually need to do, and then the lifecycle processes those things, right? That's kind of my preference architecture, I guess. But I'm very open to whatever works also. It's just that's, if analyze is going to pull information about the remote image, should it also, I'd feel a little weird about it looking for a file called project toml in the app directory, right? And acting on using that file, but I could be convinced otherwise, if that makes sense.
It depends on what part of it, right? Like the part where you have a custom build pack and it needs to fetch that build pack from an OCI registry feels pretty aligned with some of the things that Analyze does. Other things don't. I agree. So what would you talked about like something else a platform processing Project toml and then providing some other maybe very similar input to Analyze. I mean, what do you imagine that would look like? The only thing, I think inline build packs are a good example of something that wouldn't belong there. Like inline build packs would have been processed ahead of time, and the ephemeral build pack would be on the file system, and you'd give the lifecycle an order toml and not an inline build pack. But it just seems like the kind of thing that most of it would be the same. I don't know. Pierce, if you want to.
Yeah, I guess maybe an example using the include exclude thing, because I think that encompasses, it looks different in different platforms, right? The pack CLI could understand how to parse Project Toml and grab the just the files that need to be included to upload them into the container, right? Ignoring the files that should be ignored. Or if you're using Kpack and doing a source upload to your registry where you had to ignore some credential files, those definitely shouldn't, Kpack shouldn't store those files. So it may exclude those files, right, when it does the upload by part being a platform that understands Project Toml. But another platform like Tecton or Kpack pulling from Git or Shipwright pulling from Git or whatever, right, may need an in container step to exclude those files because it's going to clone from a Git repository, right? And that's where I see prepare coming in. It's a place where there's a modular part of the lifecycle that can implement that Project Toml extension, right? And perform the steps that are in containery platform steps, right? Get it to the same normalized format, right? And then pass it to analyze, which implements things like pulling build packs that we agree are core part of the spec. Lifecycle needs to have knowledge of how to do that. Again, not intended to be like prescriptive about following that workflow. It's just like an example of what seems.
Are you imagining
like
prepare
cloning
the repo? Because I feel like
build packs, or are you talking to Joe? Sorry.
I was just wanted to use Stephen. When you're talking about prepare, doing include exclude, I assume in a lot of these simpler platforms like Tecton, the repo has been cloned, and if it happened to in the clone have included or excluded things, the only option we would have is to delete them, right?
I think if it's helpful, like say for implementation of creator, right? Maybe we want to make creator so advanced, right, that it can clone the app source code and exclude things from it and all of that. And in that case, prepare could have cloning functionality, right? But in the Tecton case, I wouldn't expect you to use that. And I don't think creator should really have that anyways, right?
Yeah,
So
I feel like cloning should be out of scope for the lifecycle forever.
I just meant
credentials and
there's the place where read Project Toml and delete the files from the repo that need to be excluded, right, from the build.
Yeah, and I guess what would be bad about doing that check in analyze? So let's say you're using pack and you've already excluded it. It's basically a no-op. But is having it as a no-op bad?
I think it separates the concern, right, of providing, the source code you want to build from the core lifecycle phases, right? If you build that like removing excluded files into the core lifecycle, right, then I feel like it's encouraging people. That's not a good place to do exclusions, right? Because by the time you're doing the build, it could be happening in an environment where you don't want, it's really bad for you to have excluded credentials, for example, right? So to me, that step should be decoupled from the core lifecycle phases, right? You'd be encouraged to handle it outside of the you should be encouraged to process the input to be provided to the lifecycle first, and then provide it to the core lifecycle phases that always must run, like analyze, if that makes sense.
Yeah, in my mind, there are like two things. Like one is, although people should be doing this, does it hurt to have the life cycle as a fallback and enforce it? I would lean towards no, but I could, you could probably convince me that it doesn't, to go the other way. Sort of in the same way that, you're doing validation on a web page, you validate it in the client, and then you also validate it in the server. Like you should still platform should do the due diligence, but lifecycle will.
I think maybe the specific example is like conflating, or it's making a larger, like from a different direction. The CF CLI parses manifest YAML as it doesn't consider manifest YAML to be part of the application source code. It parses it as like it's a configuration file for the Cloud Foundry CLI, then passes that configuration further into the platform, and that things wouldn't work very well if it didn't do that, because there's information that it needs to know locally before it can, upload the thing. And it also adds more flexibility in that you could have, multiple manifest files in different directories and use them to operate against different source code if you wanted to, right? And I feel like that architecture, because we can't process the file entirely in container, that architecture seems kind of reasonable here, if that makes sense.
A great example for processing exclude, at least in my mind, is, if you run pack today and you've got a Go application, but you've got like a Ruby script in your default directory. If you run pack, it's going to exclude that Ruby file that you've added to your project toml. But then when you kick it over to Kpack, now the Ruby build pack might kick in because it's detect now passes, and now you're like installing Ruby in your Kpack produced image, but you're not in, you're not locally. So I don't know. It just feels like a confusing experience.
I wonder if part of the concern here is about, like, if we agree that maybe there's some stuff in Project Toml that the lifecycle is going to want, and it'd be helpful to be able to provide it as a file, because we don't want to have to do flags or environment variables, because that creates a complicated step in the beginning. If you want 90% of it, does it matter? Wouldn't it be simpler just to take the whole same file structure instead of inventing one that like could drift or be slightly different, and that every platform needs to know to translate? I feel like the file itself and what it contains doesn't feel like a problem to me. The location of it at the root of the repo may feel like a problem, but I feel like you could make that configurable. So that if you find one at the root of the repo, it'll be respected, but it could be provided in other places. So in the case where you're pushing a jar or something like that, you can still provide the project toml. And that would at least make it easier for platforms to implement, because instead of having to do a translation that they would have to keep up to date with the platform API, they could just copy the file over.
I think that makes sense. But you're still proposing that I'm not sure if I understood everything, sorry. You're still proposing that interchange file, the analyze phase of the lifecycle, be able to understand the project toml format, right?
Yeah.
I don't think I'm going to push back really hard on that, but
if it's controversial, I feel like we can just scrub it from this RFC and get the parts that are uncontroversial in, which is probably the right path forward.
Let me ask a related question. Would you expect, and this may be for Joe, do you expect Buildpacks to be able to read Project Toml? Like, should any build pack look for Project Toml? Or because it's an extension, should all build packs be okay with it not being there? Should we always expect it not to be there at all? And in the jar case where you could get an exploded jar that never has Project Toml in it and can't, right? Could that lead to compatibility issues?
It shouldn't be required, but I don't think it should be prevented. I'm uncomfortable with this question because I don't know. I think do some of the Packetto build packs, they use metadata to store like files and SHAs and stuff, isn't that right?
It's in Buildpack Toml.
Oh, that's Buildpack Toml, yeah.
I think it's also going away as well.
I would kind of like to say we should delete Project Toml from the app directory before the build pack sees it, so that we can't create an inconsistent experience with different platform specific descriptors and risk bifurcating the community. But that it has its own set of uncomfortabilities. And I think to me that's kind of the root of it.
Yeah, we currently read it in a build back today.
It can be pretty handy, and I feel like it would be super unexpected for someone, because it is like, especially if it's part of your source code, right? In the same way that like a POM XML is, or a package JSON.
Is it part of your source code in the same way those things are, or is it configuration
it is.
for a platform to be able to operate on your source code?
No, I think it is. I think it is. Because I mean, that's why you don't put things like secrets in there. It's sort of an abstract, like akin to a makefile. Not that makefile is abstract, but you know, like when you think of the build packs, like you are saying like these build packs are required to run this, to build this application. You can't do it without them. Or at least that's the sort of contract.
I mean, you could build the application and like, what if you had multiple build systems for your application that were different, right? It's like, is a Docker file part of, maybe the Docker file is a good example. Is a Docker file part of a Docker build? Well, if you do a Docker build of the Docker file in the directory, you end up uploading the Docker file into the build context, but then you don't do anything with it afterwards, right? And it'd be really weird. Imagine writing a Docker file where you try to read the Docker file itself from the build context in a run instruction, right? You'd feel like that was some violation of this contract because you're saying Docker run this file, and then you're saying, and inside of that, I'm going to re-introspect in the file. We're doing the same thing here, right? We're saying pack, here's your project toml configuration file. You're going to read this, exclude things from it, select build packs, and then also the build logic is going to go back and then reread that configuration later.
Oh, that's different though. No, we're not saying that, right? Because after the build pack ran, nothing would reread project toml.
I mean, the build pack is the build logic that's reading project toml after you gave it to the platform to tell the platform how to start the build. To me, that loop, I think, is what bothers me, right? Like,
I agree that loop bothers me too, but I see the life cycle as more like pack than more like the build pack in this case.
See, I don't. I see the life cycle as an in-container thing that's executing the build packs and is.
And the reason I'm inclined to see it that way is now there's a proliferation of platforms. It's just like from a practical point of view, to avoid getting like a lot of drift and different behavior, it would be convenient if some of this was in the shared component. It makes the ecosystem more cohesive.
I agree with that.
The life cycle is the shared component. You could say put a prepare, and it's not really the life cycle, but then if everyone runs it, it's really not that different.
This is easier to refactor later if we need to, right? Because we can have the lifecycle parse the current project toml format, and then later, if people don't like multiple things parsing the same file, and we have issues with mismatched components between the platform and the build packs reading different versions of the file or whatever, right? We can switch to another intermediary format that's consistent. So that's why I said I'm not going to block on, no, we absolutely need to have a different format now, because I think there is a migration path to that later if we need it. But, I do think it's possible that even more practically, we have a problem where now we have to worry about the version of the lifecycle and the version of the platform, both parsing that file and make sure that they're parsing the same version of that file, right? And that they coordinate that. Whereas if we had an interchange format, then, we'd have different contracts.
Okay, so riveting discussion. I want to make sure that Jesse is not blocked, or that we can get agreement on the parts of this at least to move it forward, right, so that he can do what he needs to do.
Yeah, I think it's all in that one bullet point that's kind of right below the screen there. I was going to kind of circle back and say like this parsing the project descriptor. That's pretty much the things that I think are in question of whether we would want this in the RFC. And we sort of talked about parsing the project descriptor for a long time, but we didn't talk about whether we would be okay with Analyzer downloading build packs or creating ephemeral build packs from the project descriptor.
If I said I'm okay with preparer parsing the project toml file format directly, if that makes sense. I guess, Emily, you're still arguing that Analyzer should parse project toml directly. Is that the?
Yeah, but I'm happy to give in and say it's prepare. That's all fine with me. Like I have a slight preference because I think it's really like 6 of one, half a dozen of the other. But also, I think we'll all be fine in the end. just very practically, I think we should probably just take the controversial parts out because we want this analyzed thing to pass without any reference to the project descriptor at all. And we can just copy paste them into a new RFC and then keep discussing it. But at least this part can move forward.
That makes
The part,
sense.
the part that's uncontroversial.
Sorry,
Yeah,
I didn't mean to go back to the discussion about which thing does which. I was trying to bring that in the context of the things you've highlighted there, Joe. Of those things, excluding and including feel like things that are more on the preparer side, right? Maybe I should phrase this as a different question. What decision do we have to make here about those things?
Whether they belong in this RFC, basically. Like, because I think if pending your approval, if we removed all of this, except for maybe I'd argue producing an order toml, I think that's the one that I care most about. From if we're going to do a project descriptor, it could still happen in a follow-up RFC, but I feel like this can be another discussion. We can handle that other ways, but if we remove this entire bullet point, would you be okay with kind of the responsibilities listed here from the new version of the analyzer?
Which entire bullet point?
The parsing the project descriptor and below. Yeah.
I think that's all stuff that I would have some preference for prepare doing, but it could be talked into it not, if that makes sense.
If we just deleted it, are you okay with everything else in the RFC? And then we can keep talking about it.
Because
we probably start implementing the other parts.
Yeah, exactly. If I can get Analyzer to do everything else besides the project descriptor, then we can come back and either,
that's just flipping the order of the two phases and having Analyzer reach out to the remote image to get information about it, and then having Restore parse that metadata and split it out into layer toml files, essentially. Is that right? Then yeah, I'm okay with that.
Okay, so we'll clean up some inputs here because we probably won't need to necessarily have app source code, for instance, in this RFC and project descriptor, all the stuff around that. I'll remove that from this RFC, maybe transplant it to a draft at some point for prepare again. We can reopen that discussion and decide what goes where. All right, sounds like we're at a close. See everybody later.
Thanks, everybody.